Der einzige wirkliche Unterschied zwischen ihm und Basil ist, dass er klein war und eine sehr große, panische Frau hatte.
It was bold, unapologetic, and side-splittingly funny. A sitcom so brilliantly absurd it became a cult classic after just 12 episodes. Fawlty Towers didn't just push boundaries. It mocked them, marched past them, and then tripped over them with a smirk. But somewhere amid the chaos, one particular scene crossed an invisible line, one that would never be uncrossed. So, what exactly was in that infamous moment that led to the show's quiet disappearance? Stick around as we uncover the scene that brought Fawlty Towers crashing down, the real hotel horror that sparked a comedy legend. It was meant to be just another place to crash, nothing fancy, just a decent hotel in a sleepy seaside town. The year was 1970, and the Monty Python team had descended on Torquay to shoot Flying Circus. But what they found instead wasn't just accommodation. It was a surreal, borderline absurd lesson in how not to run a hotel. And for John Cleese, it was the birthplace of one of British television's most iconic disasters, Basil Fawlty. Now imagine this. You walk into a hotel after a long trip, looking forward to rest. Instead, you're met by a man so suspicious and hostile, you start wondering if you're being secretly filmed. That was Donald Sinclair, the real-life manager of the Gleneagles Hotel, who somehow made paranoia and customer service go hand in hand. He wasn't merely rude. He was theatrically erratic. He treated guests like invaders and questioned their every move, as though each one might be plotting against him. One moment that left the Pythons in stunned disbelief. Eric Idle had briefly left his briefcase in the lobby. Instead of doing what any sane hotelier might, politely asking who it belonged to, Sinclair assumed the worst. Without hesitation, he grabbed the case and lobbed it over a garden wall, convinced it was a bomb. Not exactly a warm welcome, and certainly not the kind of security policy you'd expect from a hospitality professional. But that wasn't an isolated incident. When Terry Gilliam used his knife and fork the wrong way, Sinclair stormed over to correct his table manners, as though poor utensil etiquette were a criminal offense. Complaints from guests were often met with open contempt. Instead of solving problems, Sinclair added to them, creating an atmosphere that was as comically unbearable as it was real. John Cleese was baffled and amused. Here was a man so impossibly wrong for the job, so unintentionally ridiculous, that Cleese couldn't help but observe him with a comedian's curiosity. There was something oddly brilliant in Sinclair's disaster class in hospitality. Cleese took notes, literal ones. Years later, with co-writer and then wife Connie Booth, he would channel all of that madness into a character who would become a television legend. Basil Fawlty, the hilariously dysfunctional hotel manager at the center of Fawlty Towers, was born not from fiction, but from this bizarre reality. Cleese exaggerated the quirks, of course. Basil's tantrums, his endless passive-aggressive jabs, and his tragic inability to handle stress were turned up for comic effect. But the core of Basil, his suspicion, social awkwardness, and talent for offending everyone, came straight from Sinclair. The series itself ran for just 12 episodes between 1975 and 1979, but it left a mark few sitcoms ever achieve. Every chaotic misunderstanding, every meltdown behind the reception desk, was a tribute to that bewildering experience in Torquay. Ironically, Sinclair never fully grasped that he had inspired the show. He passed away in 1981, apparently unaware that his misguided management style had been immortalized in British comedy. But while Fawlty Towers gained legendary status, the real story behind its origin remained stranger and funnier than fiction. It wasn't crafted in a writer's room out of thin air. It began with a chance encounter in a town no one expected to remember, inside a hotel no one expected to talk about. And the man who inspired it all, he thought he was running a tight ship when, in fact, he was captaining the Titanic of customer service. Yet, for John Cleese, this was only the beginning. Before Fawlty Towers, before Basil, and before the accolades, how exactly did his journey start? Stay tuned to unravel the full story, from chaos to Cambridge, the making of John Cleese. Long before the Monty Python madness and Basil Fawlty's hotel disasters, John Cleese was navigating the quiet seaside town of Weston-super-Mare. He was the only child of Reginald Cleese, an insurance salesman with a dislike for the family's original surname, Cheese. Thinking it far too ridiculous for an army man, Reginald officially traded cheese for Cleese in 1923, a decision that would later match the peculiar charm of his son's comic legacy. At school, Cleese was towering over his classmates, literally. By 13, he was already more than 6 feet tall, his gangly presence a source of attention before his wit ever was. But behind the awkward height and the school uniforms, something else was brewing. His early education at St. Peter's Preparatory School, paid for by a family inheritance, planted 2 essential seeds: a love for language and a sharp eye for human behavior. He wasn't just a clever boy excelling in cricket and boxing. He was already studying the absurdities of life, albeit unknowingly. The classroom, however, wasn't enough to contain his curiosity. A statue prank during his time at Clifton College hinted at the kind of humor Cleese would come to master: dry, visual, and oddly intellectual. He painted footprints leading away from a statue of Field Marshal Haig, as if it had wandered off to the bathroom. Juvenile mischief, perhaps, but even then, it was storytelling through farce. Still, not all moments were humorous. When Cleese discovered at 17 that he'd been passed over for a house prefect position despite his academic success, it left a mark. In his own words, it shifted his view of fairness and respect, something that would echo in the satirical lens through which he later examined authority figures and institutions. With university places under pressure due to the end of national service, Cleese had to delay his dream of attending Cambridge. Instead, he returned to his old prep school, not as a student, but as a teacher of Latin, science, English, and history. Ironically, the Latin lessons he once taught would find their way into Life of Brian, where Cleese's character famously corrects the grammar of anti-Roman graffiti. Every odd detour in his path somehow became part of his creative arsenal. Eventually, he claimed his spot at Downing College, Cambridge, to study law. But fate had other plans. At a student fair, the Footlights Theater Club asked if he could sing or dance. No, Cleese said bluntly, adding that if there was anything worse than his dancing, it was his singing. "So what do you do?" they asked. "I make people laugh." And that, quite literally, was his foot in the door. At Footlights, Cleese crossed paths with future collaborators Tim Brooke-Taylor, Bill Oddie, and the one who would change everything, Graham Chapman. Together, they began crafting the kind of strange, cerebral, and anarchic comedy that would go on to reshape British television. Even after graduating with a law degree in 1963, Cleese's father continued sending him newspaper ads for retail management jobs, just in case this comedy thing didn't work out. Still, one question remains. How did this academically gifted, prank-pulling schoolboy transform into a comedic powerhouse before Fawlty Towers ever aired? Stay tuned to unravel the full story. Fawlty Towers, a brilliant mess of genius and marriage. If you ever wondered how a hotel run by a man on the brink of madness became one of the most beloved sitcoms in British history, it wasn't because John Cleese had a solo stroke of brilliance. Instead, it began with a marriage, not one built to last, but one that sparked creative magic. Cleese and his then-wife Connie Booth took a real-life experience so hilariously disastrous it stuck with them for years and turned it into something unforgettable. It all started during a notorious stay at the Gleneagles Hotel in Torquay, where Cleese found the hotel manager so ridiculously rude and incompetent that it bordered on satire. Most people would just leave a bad review, but Cleese and Booth saw something else: comedy gold. The idea of a short-fused hotel owner tangled in chaos refused to fade. And soon, the seed's Fawlty Towers was chaos bottled up and broadcast to the world. But what happened off-screen was just as wild as what fans saw on it. The slapstick humor, razor-sharp dialogue, and frantic energy that made the series unforgettable didn't just appear out of thin air. It came from a cast and crew who poured everything, sometimes quite literally, into every scene. Even his personal struggles simmered behind the laughter. The show's masterminds, John Cleese and Connie Booth, didn't just co-create the series, they were also its emotional core. Cleese played the permanently stressed Basil Fawlty, and Booth played Polly, the calm in the storm. But by the time they began working on the second season in 1978, their marriage had quietly ended. It wasn't a dramatic breakup splashed across tabloids, just the quiet heartbreak of two creative minds who had grown apart. Still, they carried on like professionals. not just tolerating each other, but working in lockstep to produce some of the show's finest episodes. You'd never guess, watching Basil and Polly bicker and brainstorm, that the real-life couple behind them had just separated as the camera rolled. There was no room for personal baggage. Even when the pressure mounted, the cast never let it seep into their performances. Prunella Scales, who played the fearsome Sybil Fawlty, was a master of turning upper-middle-class sternness into comedic gold. In real life, she was nothing like her character, kind, thoughtful, and admired across the British acting world. She once shared that Sybil was inspired by women she'd observed who could command a room with just a raised eyebrow and a sharp voice. Her transformation into the commanding hotel co-owner was so complete that even Cleese admitted Sybil's shrill Basil was enough to put the fear of God into him, on screen at least. And then there was Andrew Sachs, whose portrayal of the ever-confused Manuel made him a household name. But behind the lovable foreign waiter was a man who gave everything, sometimes too much, for his art. In one memorable scene, Basil hits Manuel with a frying pan. What most viewers didn't know was that the first take used a real pan, leaving Sachs with a nasty bruise. After that, they switched to a rubber one, but the damage was done, both literally and symbolically. Sachs also suffered minor burns during a fire scene gone wrong, yet he never once complained. With a smile and a shrug, he returned to the set again and again, turning Manuel into one of the most beloved and physically abused characters in sitcom history. Still, no amount of personal strife or physical mishaps could dull the brilliance of the show. The set might have been filled with awkward silences, ice packs, and private heartaches, but when the cameras rolled, the magic returned. The chemistry among the cast remained electric, proof that sometimes the best comedy comes from those willing to laugh through the pain. That strange mixture of tension and teamwork created something timeless. As new generations discover Fawlty Towers, they're greeted not just by brilliant writing and unforgettable performances, but by the quiet, often unseen sacrifices that made it all possible. It's easy to get caught up in the laughter and forget the cost, but perhaps that's part of the show's genius. Beneath the shouting, the pratfalls, and the burned breakfasts was a cast that showed up, gave their all, and left behind a legacy that still stands strong, rubber frying pans and all. But what happens when the man behind the chaos refuses to fade quietly and dares to reopen the hotel doors once more? Keep watching, still riding the wave of chaos that made Fawlty Towers a masterpiece of British comedy. What followed for its beloved cast proved just as surprising, and often more dramatic, than anything scripted on the show. At the heart of it all was John Cleese, the brilliant mind behind the eternally stressed Basil Fawlty. After the show wrapped, Cleese didn't just move on. He expanded his comedic empire, from co-writing and starring in A Fish Called Wanda in 1988 to lending his iconic voice to animated blockbusters like Shrek 2 as King Harold. Cleese stayed everywhere you looked. But age hasn't dulled his bite. Even in his 80s, Cleese remains outspoken, unafraid to challenge modern comedy, cancel culture, and anything else he feels deserves a verbal jab. In 2023, he made headlines again by announcing an ambitious reboot of Fawlty Towers, this time co-writing it with his real-life daughter, Camilla Cleese. The revival, set for release in 2024, promises to bring Basil's grumpy genius into the modern age, though not everyone's convinced it's a good idea. Meanwhile, Connie Booth, who played the calm, resourceful Polly and co-wrote the original series with Cleese, her then-husband, chose a completely different path. After Fawlty Towers, Booth quietly stepped away from the spotlight and pursued a career in psychotherapy. No press tours, no fan events, just a clean break from the chaos of entertainment. Her Descent surprised many, especially given how central she was to the show's brilliance, but it's clear she found peace where Basil never could. Connie Booth's decision surprised many, especially given how central she was to the show's brilliance, but it's clear she found peace where Basil never could. Away from television, she embraced a quieter life, proving that not every creative success has to be followed by a lifelong career in the spotlight. Prunella Scales, unforgettable as the sharp-tongued Sybil Fawlty, continued to enjoy a long and respected acting career on stage and screen. Over the years, she became one of Britain's most admired actresses, earning praise for performances far beyond Fawlty Towers. In later life, her husband, actor Timothy West, revealed that she had been living with Alzheimer's disease, a disclosure that prompted an outpouring of affection from fans who had cherished her work for decades. Andrew Sachs, the actor behind the endlessly confused Manuel, remained closely associated with the role that made him famous. Although he appeared in numerous television dramas, films, and radio productions, Manuel was the character audiences never forgot. Sachs handled that recognition with remarkable grace, always appreciative of the affection fans showed him. He sadly passed away in 2016, leaving behind a legacy of laughter that continues to entertain new generations. The supporting cast also went on to successful careers. Ballard Berkeley, who played the absent-minded Major Gowan, had already enjoyed decades in British entertainment before Fawlty Towers and remained a familiar face until his passing in 1988. Gillyflower, Renee Roberts, Brian Hall, and many of the show's recurring guest stars continued appearing in British television, helping shape the country's comedy landscape. What makes the legacy of the Fawlty Towers cast so remarkable is that their influence stretches far beyond the 12 episodes they created. Each performer contributed something unique, turning what could have been an ordinary sitcom into one of the most celebrated comedies ever produced. Their performances continue to inspire writers, actors, and comedians around the world. Today, Fawlty Towers remains a fixture on lists of the greatest television comedies ever made. New viewers continue discovering Basil's chaotic management style, Sybil's razor-sharp wit, Polly's calm intelligence, and Manuel's unforgettable misunderstandings. Despite changing tastes in comedy, the show's perfectly timed farce and brilliantly written characters continue to resonate. Its influence can be seen in countless sitcoms that followed, from British classics to American television comedies. Writers often point to Fawlty Towers as a masterclass in structure, pacing, and escalating comic tension. Every misunderstanding builds upon the last until complete chaos becomes inevitable, a storytelling formula that remains just as effective today as it was in the 1970s. More than anything, Fawlty Towers proved that greatness isn't measured by quantity. With only 12 episodes, it achieved what many long-running series never manage: a permanent place in television history. Decades after its original broadcast, audiences are still laughing, still quoting Basil's famous lines, and still debating the show's most controversial moments. The doors of Fawlty Towers may have closed years ago, but its legacy never checked out. Through